Jerry Agar in for Ezra Levant. Before shooting so many children and adults in Connecticut, we are told, the killer spent hours playing violent video games. Is that the reason? Rob Breakenridge is the host of Rob Breakenridge Show on AM 770 CHQR Radio in Calgary. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Jerry.
Good to have you. So I'm not buying this. I mean, there's too many kids playing video games, and those kids aren't out causing a lot of trouble.
Well, no, you're right. And I mean, when you look broadly speaking at it, what we've seen over the past 15 to 20 years is that video games have become much more violent, and consumption of video games has continued to increase. All the while, murders, violent crimes have been on the decline. And when you look beyond the United States, countries like the Netherlands and South Korea, to give two examples, are countries that consume far more per capita in terms of video games, but yet have much, much lower rates of homicide and gun violence and violence in general. And you know, when you look at video games in particular, Jerry, when I make the point about how they've become more violent in recent years, by some accounts, well over 90% of games rated T for teen or M for mature contain violence. So there is a proliferation of violent video games, but there's not the corresponding increase in actual violence.
Well, violence has always been a part of entertainment, and certainly a part of entertainment that young guys would enjoy. I mean, I grew up watching Western movies and Dirty Harry and all that kind of stuff. And again, if there was a direct cause and effect, then we'd all be killing each other. It may be something that a guy like this shooter would consume, but that seems incidental to me.
Well, I think you're right, because I think those that are predisposed to violence are going to be drawn to violent media or other violent content. So the other question from that, though, Jerry, becomes, does it make them more likely to carry out acts of violence, or conversely, does it actually make them less likely? There's some school of thought as it applies to violent people and violent content, or even you could apply the same parallel to pornography, that it becomes almost a cathartic effect, where it becomes an outlet for those kinds of feelings, or it becomes an outlet for aggression, where people who are maybe predisposed to violence are able to get some of that out of their system through violent video games. But there is the possibility still, I think, Jerry, that people who are predisposed to violence, it might not make them more likely to commit acts of violence, but it might reinforce those feelings. I think there is still that possibility.
Yeah, I don't know whether or not, when you add in, I was thinking about the pornography connection, because I hear from people whenever there's some sort of violent sexual crime, then invariably you find out that the perpetrator, one of the characteristics was that he, sometimes she, was consuming pornography. But with the internet and the sale of various videos and magazines, it's omnipresent, so it can't be a direct cause and effect. I think in the end, what we're talking about is some sort of mental instability.
Right. You know, I mean, we're seeing the exact same thing with pornography. As you point out with the internet, we've had an explosion of pornography, and yet sexual crimes, rapes, violent sexual assaults are all on the decline. So we see the same thing there. So you're right. I think we are, and we need to focus on issues around mental illness. Now, I think some people who are pushing the gun angle think that mental illness is somehow a distraction from that. I don't think it is. I think we can have these conversations on different fronts, where if we want to talk about guns, fine, we can talk about guns. But we should be talking about mental illness and mental health, and whether people are falling through the cracks, and not to blame video games or blame guns or blame anything else, but we need to focus on that clearly.
Well, video games have come under attack before, and I wonder if it's just because it's new technology and a new way of doing some of the old games. You know, kids used to play guns, go around with little wooden guns even, or replicas or something, and play various games, and now they can do it on video. But maybe it's just a lot of complaints from people who don't play video games. I don't, by the way, but I think that it's kind of an old fogey thing, maybe.
Well, maybe it is part of it. I think there are those who are opposed to violent video games anyway, just maybe because from a moralistic point of view, they feel that it's unethical or immoral to be portraying violence in that way, or to portray violence in a fun way. So people who are already against this kind of media, I think, are going to latch on to any sort of tenuous connection to suggest that this kind of media might be causing acts of violence. If it makes it more likely that we're going to ban something that they want to ban, I think we're going to jump on it. And I just think, in a broader sense, Jerry, we look for easy solutions.
Yeah.
Something awful happens, we want to be able to understand it, to point to a culprit and just say, okay, we solved that mystery, we figured it out. But sometimes, more often than not, there are not easy answers to horrible tragedies.
Well, there's no easy answer to what happened in Connecticut and all those like scenarios. And my fear with politicians so quickly going to gun control and nothing else is that's the easy answer. They can look, as President Obama up here to try to do today in his press conference, like, by golly, we're on it and we're going to get that done. And the next thing you know, we've all moved on and nothing's been done about mental health or any serious reform.
Well, I think that's the danger here. We saw something horrible happen. We want something to be done. And obviously, there's a whole lot of disagreement on what needs to be done, but it seems to be a consensus we must do something. And so when governments are seen to be acting, that can be reassuring to a lot of people. Whether or not they're doing what needs to be done or doing things that make any sense remains to be seen.
Yeah, seeming to get something done. That's what I'm worried about. And because if it's exclusively on gun control and we're not looking at these other things, then we can fail. Although I'm willing to wipe out the idea of the video games. But I appreciate your time today. Thank you, Rob.
Well, thanks for having me, Jerry.